Top speed, 470 kilometers per hour. Payload, 3,600 kilos. Armament, 7 7.92mm machine guns. Range, 2,500 kilometers per hour. Arguably the most important German bomber of World War II, the Junkers Ju-88 saw frontline service throughout all 6 years of the conflict.
I think it's an outstanding aeroplane. Innovation in terms of the power-to-weight ratio, in terms of the payload, to the range of the aircraft, all of these things boded well for the Junkers 88. Where Germany had a problem, of course, with its bomber fleet, was it didn't really have a strategic bomber, and I think that's probably one of Goering's mistakes that he made.
The German High Command's philosophy was that the bomber should win battles by hitting hard from short ranges. With a payload of over 3.5 tons and a range of just 2,700 kilometers, the Ju-88 was the perfect agent for their plan. But was it enough?
The Ju-88 is great when you're fighting Poland, it's great when you're fighting Britain, but if you are the Luftwaffe and you're fighting the Soviet Union, and Soviet industry is being successfully relocated east of the Ural Mountains, then the Ju-88 doesn't do you any good at all.
During the London Blitz of 1940, the Ju-88 was one of the leading bombers in the campaign to smash Britain. Although heavier than the Dornier 17 and the Heinkel 111, at speeds of up to 470 kilometers per hour, it was the fastest of the Nazi bomber fleet. But it was let down by insufficient armament. Whilst the Junkers boasted an extensive battery of 7 machine guns, all its forward guns had to be fired by the flight engineer, who had to leap from one gun to another as enemy fighters attacked. But the Junkers still got through, and when it did, its fear factor was high.
There's no doubt, talking to the generation of my parents, that aircraft with black crosses on, which to them was always a Junkers, irrespective of whether it was a Dornier or a Heinkel. That, I think, is a pretty good indicator of the fear factor of the Junkers 88.
The Junkers 88's versatile design enabled it to be used as a bomber, dive bomber, torpedo bomber, heavy fighter, and night fighter. For innovation and service length, it scores well. Its fear factor is high, but its poor armament and payload capacity let it down, so this German terror bomber only weighs in at number 8 on our top 10 list. Moving from the heated campaigns of World War II to the icy deterrence of the Cold War, this next aircraft earns a solid 7th place on our list. The Soviet Tupolev Tu-95M. Manufacturer, Plant Number 18, Kuibyshev. Power plant, 4 Kuznetsov 14,795 effective horsepower turboprops. Top speed, 827 kilometers per hour. Payload, 8,985 kilos. Armament, 2 23mm guns. Range, 12,792 kilometers. The Soviet Union introduced the Tupolev Tu-95 during the 1950s. The long-range bomber bore an uncanny resemblance to a famous American World War II aircraft.
Tupolev Design Bureau takes the fuselage of the B-29, takes a lot of the things that the Soviets have learned about aircraft design during the Second World War, and they build the Bear. And that's the NATO name, the Western name for Tu-95.
Unlike many other bombers of its day, the Tu-95 could defend itself with 2 radar-controlled turret-mounted guns and 2 air-to-surface missiles. And with a range of nearly 13,000 kilometers and a speed of 800 kilometers per hour, the Tu-95 was a serious threat to the West. Even more of a threat was its 8.5-ton payload. This aircraft could deliver an atom bomb.
When Uncle Joe Stalin has got the bomb and the means to deliver it, not just to Berlin, but to Philadelphia, when Joe Stalin can bomb New York City, then there is a serious threat to the United States.
In 1955, when the Tu-95 went into service, the Cold War was beginning to heat up. It was a time of hostility on both sides, when the skies seemed particularly dangerous.
Had the Soviet Union attacked the United States with a fleet of ICBMs, they would have used the Tu-95s to follow up and take out selective targets. And so they were a genuine threat.
Russia's Tupolev Tu-95 was arguably the most successful Soviet bomber of the post-World War II era. And as a threat to peace during the Cold War, the Bear scores high in the fear factor rating, as it does for innovation. It earns strong marks for payload and for service record, but scores low for defensive armaments. So the Bear can climb no higher than 7th place on our top 10 bombers list. Next, an aircraft that many call the most beautiful bomber ever to have flown, the B-47 Stratojet. The B-47 Stratojet. Manufacturer, the Boeing Company. Power plant, 6 General Electric turbojets with 7,200 pounds of thrust. Top speed, 981 kilometers per hour. Payload, 11.5 tons. Armament, 2 20mm cannon. Range, 5,600 kilometers. When the Boeing B-47 Stratojet first took to the skies in 1947, few people in the US Air Force, or even Boeing, were enthusiastic about the design. It borrowed swept-wing technology captured from Nazi Germany and utilized an unusual tricycle undercarriage. Many thought that it would serve as no more than a research aeroplane.
They didn't think about what you wanted to bomb and how many bombs you wanted to carry, how high and how fast you had to go in order to accomplish the task. They just decided, I want what we had in World War II, just a bit better. And as a result, the B-47 is neither fish nor fowl.
But by mid-1948, it became clear to the US Air Force and Boeing executives that the aeroplane far surpassed all of its straight-wing rivals.
It was simply ahead of everything in the world. There was nothing comparable to it. I flew B-47s in the Strategic Air Command, and up through the F-100, fighters couldn't touch us. The F-86s would come up, and they rarely made an intercept. For a long period of time, the B-47 was an insurmountable threat to the Soviet Union.
It was in its role as a deterrent that the B-47 became famous. With a payload of 11.5 tons, more than enough to carry America's atomic weapons, and a top speed of almost 1,000 kilometers per hour, the B-47 quickly became the dominant bomber of its day.
The B-47 makes you feel like a fast jet pilot. You sit in a bubble canopy, you've got this overpowered aircraft, you've got mechanical gates built onto your throttles to stop you putting the balls to the wall and damaging yourself in the aircraft, and that's actually quite exciting. It feels like a fast jet. You strap on a B-47 and you drive it as fast as it can go. I mean, that rocks, doesn't it?
But it was a notoriously difficult aircraft to handle.
Initially, the B-47 is a bit of a widowmaker, and initial problems with training, as well as initial problems with too much acceleration, make it a dangerous plane to fly. And the B-47 maintains the reputation for being a bit of a widowmaker for years after the problems had been mostly fixed.
But once all the early kinks had been ironed out, the B-47 became the primary bomber for the US Air Force. And for over a decade, it was America's most important deterrent against Soviet attack.
I think that we owe a lot to the B-47 in terms of the nuclear deterrence that it brought against the Soviet Union in the 50s and early 60s. This was an aeroplane which sums up the Cold War and the fact that NATO was prepared to deter any expansionist ideas that Moscow may have had.
The B-47 rightly deserves its place on our list. It scores high for both innovation and fear factor, whilst it earns medium marks for its payload and service length. Its defensive armament also lets it down,